What do you think of all of this? Do you feel that this momentum tech trade and the repricing has still got some room to run here, or are we nearing its logical conclusion?
No, I think there's a lot of room to run. And you mentioned beforehand, both of you were commenting on SpaceX. I mean, Starlink is the crown jewel of this position of this company. And there's a three-engine empire. We own just under 300 million in our XOVR ETF. And it's really Starlink, which is growing the revenues and growing the subscribers to over 12 million now. And as the company mentioned, they think they're going to hit 100 billion in revenue by the end of the year. If they do this, then the valuation's justified. And we've got to recognize that as Starlink is growing and dominating in 5 areas, they have a 5 pricing tier model. They have domestic, they have defense, they have B2B business, they have maritime, and they have aviation. Aviation charges 313 times more than the domestic consumer. And so they've got a 5 price tier. They're all priced off the same satellite, and they're growing globally at an unprecedented pace. And we saw after hours, you probably noticed this, many of your listeners probably also noticed, the major telecoms globally are dropping. They're dropping by 1, 2, 3% after hours. And that's because opinion that I think is going to space launch, and then, of course, the data centers and so forth.
Joel, so if the jury is still out and SpaceX and Elon really need to step up and prove that this is all paying off and they can hit that $100 billion mark, is there still some compression in the stock? And are we going to see $100 on SpaceX before we see 200? And what is fair value?
Market is pricing it off. It had a big day today, 10% up. Prior to earnings announcement, it's down 6, 7, 8% after hours. We've got to remember there's about $35 billion or $25 billion short interest in this stock. It's got a 95% utilization rate, which means, to those who aren't familiar with that term, it means almost every share that's available to short is currently being short. These are not necessarily people who have a bearish view on the company or on the valuation. It's largely, in my opinion, it's largely the people who own the private shares that are locked up for another 2 days. And I believe they've hedged their position. They're not supposed to be able to do this. I think many of these people have hedged their position because otherwise, when the stock price dropped 50% from its high, we would have seen them cash out. So we're seeing an interesting 2 days here. Today, we're seeing aftermarket, the price drop. We're going to see tomorrow and the next day, when the shares are unlocked, we're going to see a lot of shares unlocked in 2 days. And we're going to see a lot of movement because, one, we're going to see some of the short cover take the shares off the table and convert SPV shares, these special purpose vehicle shares, the private shares convert into the short position. So they're going to hedge that position out. Then we're also going to see a lot of shares go into the indices, which now are going to see increased float capability. So the valuation right now in the minds of many is still stretched. However, we saw generally strong performance. We saw good performance also with the Starship, that the panels, probably the most important part of the technology on the spaceships are the solar panels not the solar panels, the panels, the heat panels that stayed largely intact. And so We'll see over the next few months, how the stock performs. But we're long-term holders. We own about 300 million again in our ETF, the XOVR ETF. We like this as a long-term hold, and we have that along with Kelshi as a private holding. We're very happy with SpaceX, and we're long-term holders.
Right.
And, we spent some time talking about the U.S. and China AI competition and how the Chinese competition could bring down prices and so on. Maybe this is really a nice window for Grok to expand its market share. If the cost is really a problem, it does have the cost advantage. It could actually be the lever for expanding market share right now, no?
Well, to your point, I'm glad you mentioned this because Anthropic over here in the U.S., Anthropic, OpenAI, are the darlings for many people who are focused on the AI. They both had valuations in the $800–900 billion range, private companies. There's some people who are trading Anthropic in the secondary market as high as there's one ETF picked up a $2 million position, $1.8 trillion valuation, almost double what it was in the private markets a few months ago. And in our opinion, Anthropic and OpenAI are probably overpriced right now in the secondary market because you mentioned the Chinese competitors like DeepSeek and Kimi, which are pricing their models appreciably lower than Anthropic and OpenAI. I think they're going to have downward pressure on Anthropic, OpenAI. These companies do not have a moat. They have an open policy in terms of sharing the IP, which I think is going to be troubling for them going forward. And Grok, if SpaceX is able to get data centers in the sky, and they're able to utilize energy 24/7 and bring the cooling costs down, then they have a true moat by putting data centers in the sky. Now, whether or not they're able to pull this off, we'll see. These are one of the things, these are among the things we're looking at. But to your point, DataSeek, Kimi, they're going to have downward pressure on Anthropic and OpenAI, and I think that's going to give chance for Grok to come up, relative to these other two.
What about Tesla? Because it's been selling off. I think it's trying to come back up today. But do you think we'll end up seeing just really obvious correlation with the SpaceX? And I mean, eventually, there is really a lot of anticipation playing out for their merger. And do share if you have any intel around that. And they're working together, too, on AI side and semiconductor manufacturing plant. What are you seeing for Tesla then?
Well, so actually, I'm also a professor at Babson College here in the Boston area. And I wrote an article a few months ago talking about Tesla versus SpaceX, a tale of two Musks. And in my opinion, SpaceX is a company we're very bullish on, among the largest, 8 companies here in the US. We like SpaceX more than any of the other, large mega cap companies. Tesla, is a company, we held it for many years. We got into it when it first went public. It's a company we no longer own. We'd rather put our, trade in terms of following, Musk, we believe more strongly in SpaceX over Tesla. That's just our, our opinion for our company and our ETF at XOVR. But we're bullish, very bullish on SpaceX. We're less bullish on Tesla. We understand that many people believe ultimately there's going to be a merger. That did not come up in tonight's call. A lot of people are listening to see if there's going to be any information on that. But of the two companies, while we recognize Tesla has a lot of opportunity with robotics, and potentially that may be a catalyst for additional growth. We think the real growth between the two companies, Tesla and SpaceX, we believe is really in SpaceX by a wide margin.